Welcome to the Explainer. If you've ever been on an airplane, you know exactly that feeling when the landing gear clunks into place, the engines throttle back, the ground just rushes up to meet the window, and there's this incredible inherent tension in the cabin. The whole runway approach is highly orchestrated, but the actual landing phase, well, that is famously difficult. It's a really delicate dance of physics, timing, and human reaction. So today, we're going to break down exactly what happens in those absolutely critical final seconds of flight. Okay, let's dive right into this. Why do airplanes sometimes bounce or float during landing? I mean, you've probably experienced it as a passenger, right? Gripping the armrests as you brace for touchdown. But the plane seems to stubbornly refuse to meet the runway. It just kind of floats along. Or even worse, it touches down only to leap right back up into the air. Setting an aircraft down safely means managing incredibly fine margins. And when those margins aren't met, gravity and aerodynamics just take over in some pretty surprising ways. So here is our roadmap for the Explainer today. First, the art of landing. Second, the balloon effect. Third, the bounced landing. Fourth, holding off too high. And finally, pilot experience and recovery techniques.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the art of landing, understanding the margin of safety. Now, a perfect landing is absolutely wonderful, but as aviators know, understanding what actually goes wrong is the real key to a smooth touchdown. You have to understand the faults to correct them. And there are basically three main villains that ruin a smooth landing. The three most common faults you'll encounter are ballooning, bouncing, and holding off too high. We're going to look at each one of these individually today because while they might sound kind of similar to someone sitting in the back row, mechanically speaking, they are entirely different events in the cockpit. Moving right along to Section 2, the balloon effect. Moving up before touchdown. Now, what's really interesting about this one is that it happens while the aircraft is still entirely airborne. The official definition of a balloon is when the aeroplane moves away from the ground before touchdown. So imagine a normal steady descent. The plane is sinking completely predictably toward the runway. But suddenly, instead of touching down, the nose comes up and the aircraft actually climbs a few feet back into the air. It literally looks and feels exactly like a balloon gently lifting upward, totally defying that expected downward sink. So what actually causes a balloon? Well, it basically comes down to four primary culprits. First, too much back pressure on the control column. Basically, the pilot pulls back a bit too hard, which increases the lift. Second, too much power left on. The engines are just generating too much thrust for the plane to settle down. Third, carrying too high an airspeed into the flare, which, by the way, is that final nose-up pitch right before landing. And finally, an unpredictable gust of wind can simply catch the wings and push the whole plane back up. If a pilot experiences a small balloon, the recovery is this crazy split-second micro-story of precise corrections. First, the pilot has to instantly relax some of that back pressure on the control column to kill the excess lift. Second, they have to allow the airplane to commence its sink once again toward the tarmac. And third, right as they approach the proper hold-off height, they smoothly continue the backward movement of the column to complete the landing normally. It's an incredibly delicate reset, and it all happens in the literal blink of an eye.
But what if it's a large balloon? This is where the margin of safety drastically shifts based on who's flying. If an inexperienced pilot finds themselves in a large balloon, the standard procedure is crystal clear. They must execute a go-around. Abort the landing, power up, and try again. Meanwhile, a highly experienced pilot might actually be able to use power to reposition the aeroplane for a new flare and landing. But note the catch here. This eats up a massive amount of runway. So if you don't have the runway to spare, even the seasoned pros are going around.
Section 3, the bounced landing. Moving up after touchdown.
Think back for a second to a flight where you felt the wheels firmly smack the tarmac. Your stomach lifted as the plane immediately hopped back into the air, and you just braced yourself for a second impact. Unlike the balloon, which happens strictly in the air, a bounced landing is defined as when the airplane moves away from the ground after touchdown. The wheels have physically made contact, but the energy and the aerodynamics literally force the aircraft back into the sky. And, as the definition points out, this can happen repeatedly, giving you several bone-rattling touchdowns if it's not corrected.
The causes of a bounced landing are really fascinating. It can stem from failing to round out sufficiently, meaning the pilot just didn't level off the descent angle enough before impact. It can also happen from a high flare, high touchdown speeds, or excessive back pressure right at the moment of contact. But that last point, that is incredibly dangerous, touching down on the nose wheel first. This often happens because a pilot makes the mistake of looking directly over the nose at the rushing ground, which causes them to totally misjudge their attitude or the plane's orientation in the air, and they end up driving the front wheel directly into the runway.
So the absolutely crucial point is how you recover once you've bounced. And once again, we see a stark divide in experience. For the inexperienced pilot, the response is to initiate an immediate go-around. No questions asked. Do not try to salvage a bad bounce. For the experienced pilot, they might choose to relax the back pressure and add power to reposition the aircraft to recommence the landing. But even for veterans, this requires intense laser-like concentration and a really quick assessment of the available runway ahead of them.
And that brings us to a massive critical warning. During a bounce, human instinct might practically scream at you to push the nose down to force the plane back onto the runway. Avoid pushing the nose down at all costs. Doing so will almost certainly cause a much more violent second bounce or a catastrophic nose wheel touchdown. The pilot absolutely must maintain the correct nose-high attitude, even if they are setting up for a secondary impact. It's totally counterintuitive, but it's essential.
Moving to Section 4, Holding Off Too High. Errors in the roundout.
This particular fault is entirely about the visual and spatial challenges pilots face right above the surface. 1 foot. That is literally the magic number. The hold-off, that crucial moment where the plane is held parallel to the runway, bleeding off speed right before the wheels touch, is best completed within roughly a foot or so of the ground. If a pilot holds off any higher than this, the aircraft will eventually lose its lift and just drop. The result? A landing that is significantly heavier and clunkier than usual. So why do pilots end up holding off too high? Well, a major reason is actually vision. Think about it. If you look straight down over the nose of a plane, the ground rushing by at landing speeds is just a massive blur. If you don't look far enough into the distance down the runway, your depth perception is totally ruined, and you'll level off way too early. The other common cause? It happens when a pilot is making a nervous second attempt to land right after trying to recover from a balloon or a bounce. The faults literally just compound on one another. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Pilot Experience and Recovery. Knowing your limits. Now, we've talked a lot about the mechanics, but the human element in the cockpit is the ultimate decider of safety, and this brilliantly illustrates the overarching theme we've seen throughout the source material. Whether it's a large balloon or a bounced landing, experienced pilots have the tools to salvage the landing, if the conditions permit it. But for an inexperienced pilot, the golden rule is always, always a go-around. There is absolutely no shame in powering up and trying again. As the source text explicitly states, a large balloon may call for a go-round, certainly for an inexperienced pilot. The overarching lesson here isn't just about understanding the aerodynamics of a balloon or a bounce. It's really about recognizing the fault the absolute instant it occurs and having the humility to respect your own limits as a pilot. So, I'm going to leave you with this question. Next time you're a passenger on a flight, sitting by the window as that runway zooms into view, will you be able to spot these landing faults? Now that you know the difference between a balloon holding you in the sky and a bounce rejecting the tarmac, you can really appreciate the incredible skill and those high-stakes, split-second decisions happening right up in the cockpit. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes on the horizon.